recording. Now that we are recording, we are going to pick up our discussion where we left off. We were discussing Roe versus Wade. And remember, one of the things that we had talked about is generally what are our feelings on this law? And that's not a very good case. Even though we might like the outcome, it didn't give us a lot of good precedent as far as if I were to ask you, what are the legal rules that Roe gives us, other than the discussion that we had, the lengthy discussion that is in the opinion about the viability of the fetus, what are the legal rules that apply? Hard to say. Exactly. What constitutional amendments do they cite? Or actually any parts of the Constitution do they cite?
Once again, hard to say.
Exactly. So Roe is also doomed to fail from the beginning because it does not steep itself within a strong constitutional doctrine. It has a lot of discussion about the viability of pregnancy and our general rights to privacy and the right between or confidentiality between doctors and patients, but it doesn't really give us firm language on where we're drawing any of the opinions from. So after Roe, we go through a period as the United States where abortion clinics, medical providers, and lots of other individuals who are practicing women's and birthing people's healthcare, where we're confused as hell. We don't know what we're supposed to do. And lots of new regulations are also cropping up. Anytime there is a significant advancement in the realm of a vulnerable population or a social minority like women, or people who have to menstruate or give birth, like people of color, there is always an equally strong pushback from the other side. And this is true when it goes the other direction, every equally strong pushbacks in response to a kind of law to essentially rein it in, maybe. So we saw a lot of regulations, just like you guys might remember when Obergefell came out, that was the decision around gay marriage. There was a lot of, I won't say necessarily new laws, but new rules and policies on how certain businesses were going to be conducting, certain religions, how they were going to be going about whether or not they would solemnize a same-sex marriage or whether they would not. So you see that big pushback, and we see that in Roe. We see in Roe the form of regulation, and you guys might be saying that now, thanks to dogs. We'll get there. But right after Roe, you saw the same thing happen anyway. The next big case that we get on abortion rights is called, Ben, give me the full name, it's short, it's called Casey.
Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
Yep. Casey. So, for context, when is Roe again? 1970? 73. And when is Casey?
1992.
92. What is a very important factor, Ben, specifically about this case that's different than Roe?
Well, there could be multiple. But
okay, sorry, about the court. That's different.
it has changed quite a bit. It's a Rehnquist court.
And now there is what?
A conservative majority.
Well, yes. What else?
There's they're now.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
We have
There's
what?
a woman on the court, O'Connor.
Yes.
Brand new, I'm pretty sure, as well as a couple others.
All right, Ben, so tell us a little bit more, and just so you guys know why I'm picking on Ben a lot today, not letting you get your points just yet. Ben's graduate presentation was going to be on dogs, and then because all of the conservative parties decided to issue a bunch of laws that you all wanted to talk about, I required it for reading. So Ben is really going to be doing a lot of helping today. So Ben, you want to come up here and talk to him about Casey, or would you like to stay exactly seated where you are and talk to him about Casey? This is your show, man.
Okay, I'll stay here.
All right. You got it.
So real quick, for Casey, the main thing we're going to be discussing today is dogs, but Casey is very important as we discussed last class on the timeline and how we got from Roe to where we are now. Casey, I'm not going to go through all the issues, rules, everything, but Casey looked at 5 factors that were a new law. First one was informed consent between doctors and patient. The doctors had to know, sign off, everything about an abortion. They had to have a mandatory waiting period between request for abortion and the actual procedure. The pregnant person had to give notice to their husband if they wanted to have an abortion. If it was a minor, the parents would have to be involved.
What if you didn't have a husband?
If you didn't have parents.
Husband.
Oh, well, what do you think they would have done? What do you think they would have done?
Burn her at the stake.
And then, other general restrictions on just doctors' performance of abortions. So this introduced a new term that the court took up, which was an undue burden. And so they decided that in a 5-4 decision, it was a very mess of a decision, that they could not enforce all of the because it would place an undue burden on the person who's having abortion. Now, they did not enforce all of them. They enforced 4 of them. Which one do you think they didn't?
Class. Which one was the 4th one? Sorry, Ben, I got spousal notice, minor permission. What was the other 2? That would be one.
Informed consent of doctors, waiting period, and restrictions on performance.
So we went from a waiting period of 24 hours to 72. Okay, so these are all the new restrictions. All right, just to summarize what Ben has told us. So since Roe, we know that there wasn't a lot of great case law, and we didn't cite a specific amendment, so we don't really know what right it's coming from. We don't really know where it is happening. And all we know is that after the 1973 case, we have the right to an abortion. That's what we know. That's it. We don't know where it comes from, what the legal doctrine is, or why, but we know we have one. And why is that a problem? As we talked about, in 5-4 cases, which Roe was originally, so it's Casey, that makes it very easy to overturn. One, because you just needed one person to change their mind about the outcome in the case and not even the law behind it, before you got a completely different holding and a completely different set of law that applies to the entire country. So it's really, really important that these were very closely decided decisions and that they were not decided with a lot of consultation of pre-existing constitutional jurisprudence. That's what we're looking for, the constitutional inquiry and the connection. So when we get to, so Casey is about a lot of restrictions that came after Roe, primarily from the 80s. It happened to the tail end right in the 90s. This is like we said, a rankless court. The biggest difference and why we don't see Casey be the overturn of Roe is because for the first time in the history of the court, we have a woman. There's a very important book called The Nine. If anyone wanted to read a lot about fun Supreme Court behind the scenes, and specifically how this author predicted the overturn of Roe, they said it should have happened in Casey, and he cites that the reason it didn't happen is because of O'Connor, because who writes the Casey opinion? Ben.
Well, there is no majority opinion, which is one interesting.
Yes, and that's another thing. So it's a per curiam opinion, which means
There-
what class?
The-
Nobody, not Ben, anybody else. What's a per curiam opinion?
We cannot agree upon why.
Yes, but we all agree in the results. So we enough agree in the results, but we don't agree on the why. Why do we not agree on the why, do we think?
There's nothing that's a clear answer.
Personal beliefs, we all have very different ones, and we know from Roe, we don't even know what they cited in the first place to know whether or not we should agree with it. We don't know if we're in constitutional search and seizure land. Is this considered an unlawful search of a woman's body to detect if she's pregnant? If that is that what it is it your right to privacy? And if so, that's not explicitly mentioned. There's also a question of whether this should invoke the 9th Amendment, which is any other things that's not explicitly reserved to the states in the Constitution, which the right to privacy is not, or neither is the right to abortion, should be left up to the states. We have a very clear amendment on that. So why aren't we citing that opinion, which is actually what a lot of conservative justices say in a lot of their conversations. So we have a woman on the court who writes the per curiam opinion. Then.
O'Connor.
O'Connor was a very, very junior justice at this time. She had not been on the court for an extremely long period of time. And it was absolutely critical, according to Rehnquist, or according, yes, these judges did not agree on this, but the person who had the seniority on this one would have been. Who joined that opinion, Ben? Can you remind me?
Kennedy, Soter, and then Blackman and Stevens joined the total.
So Stevens would have been the most senior individual on there, and typically that's the person that you'll want to write an opinion. However, the most senior can dictate in the Supreme Court. This is kind of like their unofficial rules, how they function and go about writing opinions. They can decide, usually the Chief Justice assigns the opinion. But in this particular case, Stevens, because he is the oldest justice and he is in the majority, assigns the opinion. Why is it so important that Justice Stevens assign it to Justice O'Connor?
She's a woman.
She is one, a woman. What else is true about Justice O'Connor? I know Ben knows the answer to this, but anybody else know? Ruth Bader Ginsburg and all the other women who have come on the court, Sonia Sotomayor, Elaine Kagan, and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson are quite, I don't want to say infamous because I don't think it's a bad thing, but they are quite known for their very liberal stance on interpretation. Justice O'Connor was appointed by what president? Was it Reagan or Bush? I think it was Bush. So he had won that election against that presidential election against an individual who promised to put the first woman on the Supreme Court. So when he got elected, the expectation was he would put a woman on the Supreme Court. Is he going to put Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court? No, she is not in favor for him. At the time, she was actively working for agencies arguing about women's rights in the workplace. They are absolutely not going to give it to her. So they gave it to Justice O'Connor, who is a conservative female justice. I believe it was from like New Mexico or Arizona. Anyway, but the nine spends a lot of time talking about how this particular case, Casey, was so pivotal in making sure that Roe did not get overturned. So tell us then what, so the thing that they're addressing are after Roe is up or Roe is announced, several new laws exist primarily that are concerned to the court. One, spousal notice, requiring people who are married to make sure they are to provide notice that or provide proof that they have notified their spouse that they are pregnant and intend to procure an abortion. Your spouse had cheated on you and you wanted to get an abortion. How do you feel about this rule? It's actually just saw a real funny, does anybody follow the guy, the red flag guy? Red flag in relationships, you should follow him, he's hilarious. He's a guy who will like review videos of other men doing things that are terrible, and he'll just like run around waving a red flag, talking about how there's a red flag, this red flag. I hate he does it. Yes, it is a big Instagram. I think his name is like Dustin Pointer or something like that. He posted one recently where a guy was asking if he was the asshole because now he wanted his wife back after they had been pregnant for the first trimester, and her first trimester didn't go very well. And he said he felt like he married a whole new person, so he had an affair. And then when she found out he had an affair, she got an abortion and got a divorce. And he was asking if he was the asshole. I'll let you decide that, but can you imagine in a situation where spousal notice is required in that situation?
And is it notice or approval?
Notice.
So you have to say, hey, I'm not.
I believe some jurisdictions made it a little more stringent, if I'm not mistaken, Ben, where you did have to have like, the husband had to be there and like sign off or something like that, but it was jurisdiction dependent. Yes, Victoria.
So like, what about like, I'm just thinking like in my case, my parents, like my mom is like, I would say like on the more liberal side. Like, she's very pro-choice and my dad is very much whatever it is. They would just
Let's just say it's not pro-choice.
yeah. He's a very interesting.
We don't call that pro.
But how would that go about then? Because if one spouse is like very much like their beliefs are against it, but the one actually has to go through it isn't.
And now we see why we're back in front of the Supreme Court, because these are not workable issues. These resulted in lawsuits where partners were suing each other over, you know, who had the rights to the whatever. In the particular case that I mentioned on Instagram with the guy about the red flag, she texted him and said, here's the address of the hospital if you would like to go collect the fetus. Which I thought was pretty cold, but you know what? That is the response you get, right? Yes.
What if in a situation where you're trying to pretend but you haven't been able to reach them, so like how that goes? Like for instance, like let's talk about someone who's a citizen and their partner is
Yes.
non-citizen, they get deported and they don't know where they had, or they've tried to, they.
Or situation, let's say they're overseas.
Mhm.
Because of they got, not deported, but they got, deployed, thank you, I shouldn't even get her.
Like you send a letter, you leave a voicemail, but they still.
How would you do that? Especially because remember, we're still in the 70s. How are you gonna do that? So yeah, lots of legal issues where women were suing and saying, hey, these are the problems. Same thing with minor permission. This one's an interesting one. What happens if the minor was, with the pregnancy as a result of sexual assault by the person the minor is in custody of? Guess who got to decide then? No. Yes, by who? It was great, that was great, it was definitely government.
No,
It is Corinne Patrick, remember, that's the doctrine that allows us to do this, it is a judge. That young woman has to petition a judge who does not know her, her circumstances, her life goals, her dreams, her ambitions. Does not know the circumstances of this, other than that it was a person who is in their family, and now we don't trust them to tell whether or not she should have an abortion. But we're gonna trust this person that we are repatriated the shit out of and given the judge permission. So when the parent can't make it, or this person is in foster care, where they don't have parents, as we, for whatever reason, a judge will make the determination. So, yes, that created a lot of problems. What do you do with your judgments? That I don't believe in abortion. I don't think you should have the right. I don't care if you were raped by the person who you are supposed to trust the most. Don't care.
And could you only get a judge to review that if you had a conviction from your rapist, like if your rapist was convicted?
No, you did not have to.
And in this situation, which is sort of mentioned about foster care, so let's say I'm in the foster care system, now I'm pregnant, and the judge and I have to keep it, but if my foster parents don't want to keep me and pay. So like.
Great question, judge decides.
Really my foster parents have to. Okay.
And your foster parents are responsible for that child as well. Or that child is gonna go into foster custody themselves because they don't have a parent who is a legal guardian. See, great decisions all around. Next, informed consent. This one is really actually important. Informed consent should exist, period, whatsoever. But the problem with the way they treated informed consent was, how many of you have had a surgery before? Just a surgery, period. All right. I'm gonna talk about briefly, what I got told post-hysterectomy. Post-hysterectomy, I got told, after a period of surgery, you may have, issues with constipation that happens when you're under anesthesia. So, let us know if that persists. You also may have some stomach or bloating issues because obviously there's a lot of trauma to that region. So let us know, if that persists. If any of those things generally happen, you have spotting, have bleeding, let us know if it happens. Nothing else about that. I have just attended pelvic floor therapy in which I learned the reason in which those things happen is because scar tissue fills the bottom and fills the void in which your uterus or other body parts used to take. Your body doesn't like open spaces. It will fill them with scar tissue. Scar tissue can choke out your intestines and or other bits of life that are very critical right here, which means that you might have to have other surgeries to remove that scar tissue or to make sure that you're able to literally go to the bathroom correctly for the rest of your life. Do you think that's important information that I should have known before I signed up for that surgery? I did not get that information. So to kind of parallel what you get for a hysterectomy, which is just let us know if these things happen after surgery. They don't tell you that they're going to happen and that they'll proceed to happen. In fact, they'll get so much worse if you don't treat them that you'll require a second surgery. With abortion informed consent, can you imagine what that would look like? Do you think they just told you, oh, it'll be a little uncomfortable, you might be bleeding or spotting for a few days? Or do you think they may have made young women watch very graphic videos of abortions and what happens to the discarded fetuses? The second one. So jurisdictions were requiring people before they agreed or before they had an abortion to watch this level, and that was considered informed consent. I didn't have to watch a video of my own surgery, even though it's going to have lifetime implications, but these people had to watch one because getting rid of a baby does not have lifetime complications. Interesting. And then waiting periods. Why is also waiting period a big problem?
Well, it's kind of an important thing. It's really way too long for the babies.
You're already on the timeline, you're already expedited, you only have 9 months to make one of the biggest decisions you might ever make in your entire life. And now you're going to ask people to wait even longer? And what about people who live in rural areas? I grew up in McMinnville, Tennessee. Do you know where the closest abortion clinic at that time would have been to me?
Memphis.
Oh, no, they don't have them in Murfreesboro and in Nashville
If you
or in
look it up-
Chattanooga.
If you look
Memphis.
it up, the closest one, if somebody
It was
in
Memphis.
Memphis right now looking for one,
Yes.
your only option is Illinois or Georgia. That's the closest.
Atlanta, Georgia, or, is it Campaign, Illinois?
I think. And
No, Carbondale.
I know it's.
Because Memphis Choices started a pipeline, so Memphis Choices was a reproductive service agency that provided abortions. They are now obviously with our total abortion ban not allowed to. But if you come to them for their services, they will arrange transportation to you to go from, here's our state. From here, here's Illinois, to here. To procure the abortion and stay with you for the intended time of the waiting period. Of course, there's a waiting period. So if I was here in McMinnville, how would I do any of that if I had been that, if it happened to me when I was a teenager? Or let's say it happened to me now. And I was stuck in my mom's house, God forbid. I'd have to drive at least 4 hours. And then if it's a 3-day waiting period, how many days am I staying in that city? At least 3. And again, if any of you followed Allie Phillips after the last time we had this conversation, she was an individual who was in Tennessee and she had to fly all the way to New York. And she had to wait 3 days in New York and pay for all of that. And at the time it was during COVID. You know what happened during COVID? No one was allowed to have anyone come care for them. So she had to fly by herself to New York, have a procedure done by herself in New York, grieve the loss of her child who had already been named by herself for 3 days before she was able to fly back home. So waiting periods creates what some people later called undue burdens. So Ben, tell us about how the Supreme Court sort of kind of solved the issue, but not really.
So on top of these undue burden requirements, there was also an overall issue that this case presented, which was overturning Roe v. Wade. That was probably what they wanted to do overall. However, the 5 majority agreed that at least 4 of these, or one of these regulations gave too much burden on the person who's pregnant. And that was the spousal notice. They said that would give too much power to the husband, and they struck it down. But the other 4 were kept. They also switched it from trimesters to viability, which we've already discussed. There were 2 of the 4, or 2 of the 5 said that they thought all of them were undue burden, Blackman and Stevens. Whereas the other 3 thought it was just 4. Did you say question?
No, that's not Taylor's hand. So we go from the trimesters, which is like the standard originally, to this viability standard.
Does not help clear things up.
But it doesn't clear anything up, because some people can, or some babies are viable early in their second trimester, and some babies don't become viable until very late in their third. It just depends on the baby and the human carrying it. So we went from the trimester, which was already a stupid rule, to something even more, what would we might call something like viability?
Subjective.
Great word. What's a synonym for subjective?
Great.
Keep going, start with a V.
Hey.
Yes, and do we like vague things in constitutional interpretation? No, we don't. We don't like them because we don't understand what we're supposed to do with it. Yes, Victoria, and Taylor, can you take your hand up first?
Is that like, is the viability thing why they make like a heartbeat?
Yes. Yes, that's also why you hear a lot of those things like by anti-choice advocates who say things like, did you know your baby has a heartbeat at such and such dates? Did you know your baby has fingernails at such and such date? Did you know your baby develops eyes at such and such age? Those things are there, but the early versions of them look much more like a fish than they do a person. They don't start.
When they put animal fetuses.
Yeah.
You can't tell the difference.
Yes, there are times in which that has been discovered to be true on like giant billboards or other advertisements that they actually use the what the image that they use and thought was of a human fetus was not of a human fetus, and that is again, because if you also look at us when we are in utero, we have tails. We also have gills. So, at the point in which those things disappear depends on your development and how well you're doing in the development process. Taylor and then Victoria, go ahead, Taylor.
So with the undue burden, we go from a 24-hour waiting period to now we have a 72-hour waiting period.
Yep.
And while they don't have the final say if we can get an abortion, they have a final say on whether or not we can get it through.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
yes, it does, to me as well. Victoria, go ahead.
Something I just wanted to bring up that I saw the other day was, kind of talking about like, it was on the topic of like how babies develop and stuff, and how a lot of like anti-choice people, they're also, they're not very tolerant in general, so something brought up like, okay, if we're gonna start life at inception, does that mean that all men are transgender then? Does the penis
That's something, that is correct.
doesn't grow until like we're all female.
Yes, you can only get the XX, the Y gametes does not, or the Y chromosome does not start developing its actual process until like after the first trimester. So technically for that first 3 months, we're all. You like them apples?
I mean, that can be our case and we run the world.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, so I agree with, the Roe v. Wade like ruling,
Yeah.
but me, like I'm a child of God, and I believe that every life is sacred and everything deserves a chance to have life, but given the circumstances of the Roe v. Wade case and how it came about, I truly believe that a woman has a choice whether to abort the baby or not. Because whether she be a rape victim, whether it be like an accidental pregnancy, whether it be like maybe a one-night hookup and it was like accidental,
Yeah.
and she just wants to abort it, it should be her choice, because she does not want extra baggage on top of her, because then if the baby is conceived, she would have to worry about going to WICs, going daycare, going like extra money towards baby food, diapers, all of that, which she may not be able to provide because she's either a high school student or a college student or a working class citizen that cannot make ends meet with a child alone.
Or maybe just don't want to, right?
Yeah.
Because what kind of burdens does having a child place on you? Anybody who has children?
Even if you're the most wealthy person in America, having a child. And we always talk about like abortion in the context of something went wrong, but I think we need to remember that like even if everything was perfect, I'm wealthy, I'm in a position in my life where I can responsibly care for another person, I maybe just don't want one.
Mhm.
And that should be enough. That should be enough reason.
I feel like I have that argument as a woman who doesn't want kids every fucking day, and I hate it.
That's an 18-year-old commitment.
No. It's a lifetime commitment. I understand people are like 18, because that's like when a child matures and reaches adulthood.
So it's still.
I was gonna say,
You know, because
how many of you are above the age of 18? How many of you still have regular conversations with your parents? How many of you still regularly receive some kind of support from your parents, emotional, financial, or mental?
Laundry.
Exactly. So parenthood is a lifetime commitment. Dr. McCuddy and I are not signing up for 18 years of the next 18 years with our surrogate and whatever child we hope to produce. That's not it. This is a lifetime commitment. When I fostered my son, I did not sign up for when he turned 18. He turned 18 very soon in that process. He is now 24. It is still my commitment. All day, every day. That's what you do if you are a parent. And I'm sorry if you do not have parents that do that. We can have a conversation outside of class, but to me, it is a lifetime commitment. What that lifetime commitment means is what? Financial stress, big one. You know how much it costs to have a baby? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, for sure.
I think
And then
that's
that's-
what
go ahead.
Ellen's saying, is that like, yeah, you can be financially stable, if you want to still want it, like, for instance, sometimes as a side job, I work with kids. And I sometimes know their kids better, and I work with rich families, so I know their kids better than they even know their kids. The kids come to me and tell me about how their day goes secret, and they don't do that with their parents. And obviously the parents are hiring me and getting me, because they don't have, like, they want to go play tennis, they want to go hang out and drink and have brunch with their friends. And they know that their kid is only better than them, so they feel like that's what's going on. So like that's, I don't know, sometimes certain parents think or have this idea of being a parent is so great, but then they kind of find out that like, oh man, I can't continue having the lifestyle that I had.
Right, it is a huge lifestyle change. One of my surrogate, who's previously had a child, posted recently about, it was like a pretend conversation between two people, but it was really just one, they're like, I don't understand why people think motherhood is so hard. And the person responding, or that person responding is like, yeah, you just have to, grieve the loss of your own individual identification, spiritualization, and mentality, and give that up and sacrifice to the betterment of someone else's physical health, mentality, and emotional well-being for the rest of your natural life. You're right, there's nothing to grieve or difficult about that process, right? Nothing at all. Victoria, go ahead.
Something that I don't really brought up as much is like, you could want a baby and it could be like the most perfect situation. You want the baby, you have all this money, you have the time, but like, your body can't handle, like, someone that makes me come to mind, which I don't even like her like that, y'all. She just came to mind because I used to be a big fan of Kim Kardashian.
There we go.
Because like she had to get a surrogate because her body, like, after that first pregnancy, like, she could not do it. Yeah, she has all the money and the time and all of that in the world, so. What about women like that? Like, it's a lot of like different like gray areas.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm reading a book called Queer Conception now, specifically written for people who are LGBTQ, trying to go through the process, because it's much different if you are a queer family than if you are a straight presenting family, and what you're trying to do. And one of the things that they also repeatedly talk about in that is like, what if having a pregnancy would just make you have horrible gender dysphoria? Or would make you reverse some of the other healthcare decisions that you've made. Or to give you guys again some context on my situation, or to give my situation context, it would have a substantial risk. So my risk of ovarian cancer pre having a baby, just blanket, was 60%. I'm 60% at some point in my life to develop ovarian cancer before my hysterectomy. I was 80% likely to develop breast cancer, and that happened at 25. So it's very, very likely. And with a pregnancy, does anyone want to guess how much that would have skyrocketed my risk of ovarian or my breast cancer coming up? Back to the 80s. So does that make it, even though I can conceive, or I could have conceived, does that make it a good idea for me? Does that make it a good idea for my body? Does that make it a good idea for Dr. McCuddy, who's going to be informed under these ridiculous laws? Is he going to be okay with that? No. Those of you who know him?
No.
Absolutely not. He's never going anywhere if I'm not a part of it. Not happening. He's not risking a potential baby for me. Especially because then who are you doing it with? You're alone. Ben, tell us a little bit more about the rationale from this.
So an important thing that the five that sided with this mentioned was that America was not united on this issue. And that because they were not united, they did not believe that they should overturn a previously decided case against the general right to abortion. Which the four who dissented did not like.
Why did the four want to overrule? What were their reasons?
They wanted all of Roe v. Wade gone.
Why?
Probably personal preference.
What? That's likely true because who are the four who dissented? Let's just recall.
Thomas is very new. Yes.
Thomas is brand new on the court. This is one of his first decisions. Yes, and he does want it. Scalia is also relatively recent at this time. And so, yes, he votes.
Rehnquist and White.
Thomas. Scalia. Rehnquist, who again is a Chief Justice who was appointed by a very conservative judge or very conservative president. Who was the last one? Thomas Scalia. Huh? White. That should tell you all you need to know about his. Maybe all you need to know about his general philosophy of life. Just gonna leave it there.
And if they did not overturn Roe v. Wade, they believe that all five of these, or all the requirements should have stood, especially the for quitting self notice. I know someone mentioned Alito was like.
Well, I did.
Okay, so I wrote about Alito a little bit because this case came up.
Yes.
All the courts, whatever. Alito was on one of them.
Yes,
And-
Alito was on a lower court at the time that heard this case.
He voted against it there because he believed all the requirements should have stood. He wrote a decent amount on spousal notice and why it was important. But he was not yet on the Supreme Court. And all of these 9 justices, 8 were appointed by conservative presidents. I did look, O'Connor was Reagan after all. Soter and Thomas were both by Bush Senior. And so, and also the one who was not conservative was White, who also was in the dissent on Roe v. Wade. So you've got probably 9 people who would have overturned Roe. It is, I wrote that I don't know how it didn't.
I don't get it, that's why I have you facing it.
But in general, it shows a great progression. And I also wrote a little bit about how these people have been appointed kind of for this reason, especially Alito after that by Bush Jr. They were appointed to overturn this. They failed in Casey, so they got Alito on, who ended up writing the opinion on Dobbs.
Yes, this is all in the 9 as well. So a lot of this backstory that Ben was giving you also about the Casey case is also in the 9. So if you're very interested in seeing it, but this is also what I mean when I talk about read dissents, especially if you're going to law school, they're going to be super important. The dissents in Roe set up Casey, the dissents in Casey, and even the majority in Casey set up Dobbs. It was clear from Roe's inception that the conservative party were going to try to appoint as many conservative justices on the court, and we're going to continue to bring this issue to the court until it was changed. And as Ben has rightly pointed out, a lot of liberal judges and justices didn't really do a whole lot to stop that from happening. Why do we think that's true? I think money is a big part of it. Think for yourself. What other reasons? Do we like doing things that make us politically unpopular? No. That's funny, sorry, all right, in current climate, I understand that, all right. Do we like doing things that risk us losing our power?
No.
In the 70s and 80s, remember, we saw a huge conservative kind of pushback after the 60s and 70s strides that were made towards civil rights. So if they don't have it, the liberal justices aren't coming for it, and it's not good law. You guys even said when you read Roe, nope, not confident about this case. If you were the judges and you were the justices, how would you have decided Roe to prevent what we see happen in Casey and what we are going to discuss in just a few moments happens in Dobbs?
Put more parameters around it, maybe.
More parameters?
Yeah.
What kind of thing?
Like maybe define better exactly how.
We get this right?
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like, I mean, they overturned it on like a technicality on them, so it's like.
All right, so let's discuss Dobbs then. All right, I'm gonna set Dobbs up and then Ben's gonna knock it out of the park. All right. Dobbs. Not erasing most of this because I want us to remember what happened in Casey. I am gonna erase
You
this.
can erase those guys. They don't need to be-
They don't need to stick around. We know about these assholes. Just. All right. Tell me somebody else who has not been, because you all were supposed to have read that. Tell me the legally relevant facts of Dobbs. Remembering these were the regulations we were fighting the first time. What's coming up in Dobbs?
The Mississippi Gestational Age Act.
Mississippi MS. Gestational age. Which said what, Michaela?
There's no abortions after 15 weeks. With little exception.
We'll just put minimal exception. Just so we can clarify, how many typical weeks is a pregnancy? 40. When do you usually know that you're pregnant?
After you miss your first period, which could be
6 to 8 weeks. So for the first half of the period that you're allowed to have an abortion, you probably won't even know that. What are the other legally relevant facts? Somebody else?
What's wrong with me in a minute?
No, surrogate just started a period, which means she's a bit not pregnant. We didn't think she was. But we'll try again. Anyway. 6 to 8 weeks notice. What else? Legally relevant facts from jobs. Victoria.
I guess like there's no limits, like there's no like exclusions for like an emergency or sexual assault or anything like that.
Anything else? Go ahead, Destiny.
The Jackson Woman Clinic, which is the other side of this case, they were the only licensed abortion clinic.
Anything else? Victoria, go ahead.
They also said that, there was nothing in the Constitution about having the right to an abortion.
We'll get to that. Ben's gonna tell us about the legal explanation and stuff like that. Ben, have I set it up enough? Are you good to go? We need to go, or we need to do issues?
I mean,
So we know what's the issue? Somebody shouted out. Somebody who has not already thought.
The Mississippi law, like getting all abortions that are 18 weeks, is additionally unconstitutional.
it seems pretty straightforward in the issue, and also the facts are a mess that we discussed in Casey and Burke. Um,
So Ben, tell us a little bit. So much. Tell us a little bit about that, or the court's opinion in Dobbs.
So this is what, 30 years?
Yes.
What did I say 92?
This is
Oh, this is 22.
So yeah,
A lot of
my lifetime away, about as old as I am.
justices have come and gone.
Yes, so now what's our court look like now?
We have Alito, Thomas, Barrett.
She's down here, is he's somewhere in here.
Robert,
Robert's at the top, because he is what?
Chief Justice.
There we go.
Hagan.
Hagan.
Sotomayor. Breyer, Robert.
Oh wait, Breyer's up there too. Damn, forgot how old he was. He's not supposed to be down here, but he is for this purpose.
Strawn Aaron.
Yeah, he goes up here.
Appreciate it. Barrett on the bottom.
Barrett is on the bottom where she belongs.
Robert.
Brown, Jackson. I got Roberts.
Oh, did you? I can't read this right.
I got
I
9.
don't see Robert's. Oh,
So
okay.
Ralph Jackson, I believe, was after
7, 8, 9. Oh, she was after this?
It was Gorsh.
Oh, this is Gorsuch.
How do you say it?
Gorsuch.
Okay.
Actually,
Yeah, because Breyer would have replaced, or Sandy Brown Jackson replaced Breyer.
Okay.
Yeah, that's our court.
Looks pretty different than the, especially the ones in Roe.
Certainly much different than Rose, because even though it was 9 men, at least half of them were liberally interpreting the court constitution. Planned Parenthood, they're all like 8 conservative appointed justices, and still somehow we get this decision, so it seems pretty promising. But what happens between Casey and Dobbs? Specifically, what happens after President Barack Obama is elected?
War on women.
The war on women, I think that's a great, okay, so somewhere at this point, we have faced the war on women. And we're gonna use that term loosely to apply to any person who menstruates, who chooses to be a woman,
The
who,
war on not men.
exactly, more specifically, the war on not people with penises. Right?
No,
Everybody,
because even if you have a penis, but you identify as a woman, I hate you.
that's true. Nobody knows. This, we know that all of the work, we won't go, war on women happens. Come on, then, talk to us a little bit more about the Dobbs opinion.
So I believe Trump, put in 3 justices, is that right?
How many did he was responsible for? So this was an old one, this was an old one, this is Obama. This is Obama. And Kavanaugh should have been Obama. But it was Trump.
I'm surprised you read that.
I am too, I'm tired.
I was expecting 45.
I love that you guys know me so well. Right? And then who were these guys appointed by again? Rehnquist or Bush Senior? Or Reagan?
Uh,
Is it Reagan?
Wasn't Tom Bush Senior and
Thomas Bush Senior, Alito Bush Jr. I have no idea about Robert T. Well,
Oh, this was Bush Junior. I know this one.
Robert.
Because he came after actually Thomas and Alito, he's younger than them. To the court, at least. So, not looking great already, is it?
Gorsuch?
Yeah.
Was Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, you got it.
The only one I don't have is Breyer, and I don't know who appointed Breyer.
Clinton.
I was gonna say, I knew, but I forgot Clinton snuck in there as a Democrat for like a hot second. Between all the
Clinton.
conservative, Clinton. His name is, like, he's might as well have been a conservative.
So you've got 3 brand new justices, and I've already mentioned that, it seems like some of these justices are being appointed for 1 issue and 1 issue only.
Because what was said during the 2016 presidential campaign with respect to Roe. Yes, was that not a campaign promise that was made by this president? So what does that mean for whether or not, again, remember the Supreme Court is supposed to be appointed to be neutral arbiters of the law. I know we're all cackling inside our heads if we say that, it's hysterical, it's stupid, and completely untrue. But in theory, that's supposed to be the case. In fact, during the individual hearings for Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Barrett, and where's the other one? I thought he got 4. We only got 3. All 3 of them had to swear under oath in front of Congress that they recognized that Roe was settled precedent and that women had a right to an abortion. You can go look it up. It's recorded. They all swore up and down that they said that they believed it. But the person who appointed them literally made a campaign promise that he was going to make sure it was overturned. What's the problem with that statement? It's very contradictory. It is very contradictory.
Well, he can't overturn shit.
He can't overturn shit. He is the executive officer. What is the point of having a judicial branch if it is at that extension of the executive branch? What's the point of having 3 different branches of government? Open question. Checks and balances. If your president is saying, I'm going to make sure that this court case that was decided, even under conservative justices, is overturned, and then I'm going to appoint people to make sure that happens, where was the balance? Where was the check on the authority? Just that way. So if we're talking about here and how unsettled America is here, I'm going to raise that briefly for an issue here in Dobbs, Ben. What is true about Dobbs that is different than Planned Parenthood versus Casey and Roe versus Wade? Yes, you can.
I think America's more united. than that.
Yes. We are now, for the first time in a history, a pro-choice nation. A majority of people who can vote, and just generally people, demonstrates overwhelmingly that as close as 70% of the population believe that pro-choice is the way to go and that women have a right to an abortion. So unlike the previous instances in which we have a conservative court, but very undecided America, we have very conservative court, but a very decided America. And it's decided in the opposite direction. So Ben, talk us through how we get to the decision in Dobbs.
So the justices kind of have to justify themselves for their decision, and what they do is they say that it's not in the Constitution, and that it should not be up to the nation to decide a matter that's not in the Constitution, rather up to the states. That is the main opinion. It was 6-3.
Thank you so much. And I don't really feel like I need to tell you what 6-3 it was.
We should get.
You cannot tell from the
If
people.
we guess it right, are we excused from the rest of the grades of class?
Why don't you try to get out of the very middle of that?
One word, senior, right, we're so tired.
You don't know. No constitutional provision. Ben, please continue explaining. There was no constitutional provision.
The, so we're on the 14th Amendment, so we can kind of know what we're linking it to.
Yes.
And in the 14th Amendment, it's the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all that. They explicitly stated that abortion is not liberty. And so that's another reason that it should not be decided by the court.
Yes, Joshua.
I'm not sure if I read this in either Roe versus Wade or in Dobbs case, but wasn't there, I don't know, it was the Fourth Amendment that said that fetuses weren't protected under the amendment, or they weren't recognized as being protected under the.
I don't, that's not in Dobbs. It's in, it was suggested in Casey, I believe. And am I wrong with that? That a fetus doesn't necessarily have rights because it's not a citizen yet.
I don't know.
I
I know
believe
that
that was suggested. in
the
Casey.
9th Amendment is also brought into it. I don't know about that.
And the 9th Amendment, so we also have these things brought up in Casey, but like. That's a great question. So how do all of you feel about the fact that abortion is not liberty, or for that
Pursuit of
matter, the
happiness.
pursuit of happiness?
Or life, rather, all of them.
It may not be the pursuit of happiness or liberty for a man, because we that is something we can go through, but I mean, as if we're recognizing women as citizens of this, that's also protected by the amendment.
I was gonna say, but Joshua, I mean, if we recognize the citizen, we're treating that like, shouldn't that be the answer? So then the question becomes, why is that not the answer? Because the first if we treat women like citizens, we are treating. In what points of history have we treated any person who is not a straight cis white land owning heterosexual male as a citizen? Or have we not assumed their citizenship? Because we assume no citizenship for that people, but how many people in this room at one point or another had to have their ancestors fight for their right to vote? Right? Most of us in here. And that's not the same about those of you who didn't have to have your forefathers have the right to vote, but at some point in your lineage, someone had to fight for your right to vote. Ben's mom had to fight for the right to vote, right? Same thing with John's mom. They're not excluded. All of those people had to fight for the right to vote.
This
Because we didn't assume they were citizens. Go ahead.
this leads directly into a bit of their reasoning
Yes, go ahead.
and how they decided that it was not liberty.
Yes, and what is that?
Thomas also went into this, he's very infamous for this, and that it has to be deeply rooted, we've discussed this, nation's history and tradition, has been considered by the forefathers when they wrote the amendments or whatever that's being discussed. They did not believe that abortion was a deeply rooted issue, they did not believe that the forefathers could have considered it, and therefore it's not included. Thomas believes that other cases similar that are also in this conversation should be struck down. Hold on. Griswold versus Connecticut.
Yeah, those were all other cases that came between parents and cases.
That is married persons to try and obtain contraceptives.
Without spousal approval.
Lawrence v. Texas.
Which is?
Yeah, right, sexual acts are private, or consensual sexual acts are to remain private.
I'm just gonna put gay sex, because we all know what that one was about.
The Bergerfeld and Hodges is same-sex marriage.
This is gay marriage.
Oh, the.
What?
Let me go. I'll find it.
There's one that he actually left off.
What did he leave off?
He left off Loving V Virginia.
And what? Benjamin, does Loving V Virginia address?
It addresses interracial marriage,
And Thomas is, remind me then, what?
like man.
He is a black man, he's married to who?
A white woman.
A white woman, not just any white woman, a January 6th white woman, ready to go down with the country insurrection white woman, right? Taylor, please go ahead.
No, we don't.
Update.
She does not come to the meetings, I'm just gonna let you guys come, go ahead, Taylor.
Tennessee is currently trying to fucking justify cousin marriage.
Accurate. So, fun note on that. Do we want, so actually my spouse told me all about this. All right, so pause. I had to say, all right, we will get there. Let's center ourselves. All right, we're back. We're still with dogs. We're still discussing dogs. We're still taking up the issue that Thomas has brought up, which is that it's not deeply rooted in our nation's history.
It definitely is though.
I was gonna say, anyone who's ever, or actually just contemplated the idea of sex, just like thought about it, been present in a sexual ed class or anything like that, do we genuinely believe as a human species that abortion was not happening prior to 1973?
They weren't saying anything, they were just following down the stairs.
Or like, yeah, using like
There's not gonna be offered terms, not with like better devices. So like, I was just saying, how did the co-payer become so synonymous if it weren't based in fact? Or falling down the stairs, if these weren't methods, I guarantee you can type on Google how to, and one of the answers will be in the pregnancy without. Exactly, because this is not a new thing. Did anybody watch The Great? No, actually, yes, Catherine the Great. Yeah, it's hilarious. So for the first season, they are there. They're very much trying to get her pregnant. She's not going to get pregnant because Peter the Great is Peter the Terrible. He's awful. He's a terrible human being, and everyone in the show hates him. But he's the emperor, so they have to appease him. So guess what the method then, when Catherine the Great was about to take over all of Russia, what was the method to keep her from being pregnant? It's actually discussed in the show. So if we think, again, abortion and things to prevent pregnancy were not happening, what was she using? Then this was common knowledge and it is still accepted. Not accepted, this is not a good method of birth control. This is what they did at the time. Close. Lemon tops. Cut off the tops of lemon and insert it as far as they could into the cervix, so that when a man ejaculated inside of them, all he would ejaculate into would be the top of a very acidic lemon, which would kill all of his healthy sperm.
Who came up? I'm concerned.
Midwives.
Someone's gonna do that for
Midwives. Midwives have existed beyond, okay. Right, gotta do that.
Yeah, how do you? So you could say that and think we're not gonna have questions.
You can have a question, you raise your hand to have questions,
Okay.
and we communicate like a class.
Okay.
Thank you so much, my love, you know I love you dearly.
Mhm.
The rest of the class also. So yes, that is the method that was previously used. It was discovered by midwives. Midwives were also very, very popular. And midwives who practiced outside of the palace were actually better at keeping babies alive than midwives who practiced inside the palace. Because they had to deal with more extreme conditions and they had less things to deal with. So they were very good at making sure babies lived and making sure that they could control when they did or did not want to have a pregnancy. So this is the method that they use. And it's the method that Catherine the Great is using so that she doesn't have to bear the horrible hellspawn of Peter the Terrible. We are saying it's not deeply rooted in our nation's history. What would you say is deeply rooted in our nation's history? Slavery. Guys, I have to tell you also know. After slavery, what else is deeply rooted? And again, that's just, when we say slavery, we're also assuming patriarchy, white supremacy. Those are all deeply rooted in. What would you say?
Sexism.
Sexism,
Guns, yeah.
guns, all right, guns, guns is deeply rooted. What else? Capitalism is deeply rooted, agreed. The military is deeply rooted, I would agree with that. Oh, that is an interesting one, isn't it? But it's not untrue though. What did we also like, used to be able to get morphine and cocaine, that's literally how Coca-Cola got its name. It used to have cocaine in it.
Soldiers use.
And soldiers used to use it too. They used to get prescribed these things so they could stay up all night and be able to continuously perform capitalism because it is deeply rooted in our nation's history. Pause on all the negative things or what the negative things. What positive rights can we think of that are deeply rooted in our nation's history? Victoria.
And as someone who comes from a country where they like jail you for like how you feel about the president, and if you say the wrong thing, that happens a lot less here.
Yes.
Like, it can happen, I guess, but
Our First Amendment right
like,
to speak.
you have to like threaten, you have to like threaten.
Yeah, you basically have to make it
Do
very,
something about it.
not even just like a general threat, like I could be like, I would fucking kill Donald Trump if I'm ever in a single room with him.
Yeah.
That's not gonna get me arrested because what's the likelihood of that happening?
But yeah, I'm not with that. I don't wanna go through this.
I just feel like someone's gotta be the martyr and I'll survive prison, I'm fine.
I would not let this
Honestly.
day.
I'm not going to thank you, Joshua, I appreciate it.
Whoa.
Okay, we're on this is a different rabbit hole. Don't get me started on how I
Kingpin.
Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
Prison up. Okay, I'm done.
I'm gonna talk to the side of the class that's focused today. Back to what we were discussing, and I don't remember what it was, Lorena, what was the point? You just
Good
made?
things that are rooted in
Yes,
our
good things
nation.
are rooted, and Victoria, very nicely pointed out that in other countries, they can't speak the way that we can openly speak about people that we don't like or don't agree with. Same thing with religious practices. There are certain other countries in which if you don't belong to the predominant religion, you can be jailed and killed, right?
Yes.
Education. We have always had a public education system. We don't actually have a right to education. That's where Alito or Thomas gets off on his bullshit stuff. That's where he also is like, school vouchers are the way to go.
Hello?
Yeah. So like, there are some justices who don't believe that, but generally speaking, we have always educated, and that's why, even though it's not in the Constitution, we generally support it, despite the occasional cuckoo like Thomas who gets on the court and believes that we shouldn't be doing that. It's interesting, again, as a man who literally grew up in public education and was the recipient of multiple diversity awards throughout all schools. So I'm kind of like. Anyway, we can't wrestle with Thomas too many of them today. But there are some good rights that are deeply rooted in our nation's history. Are there any medical practices that are rooted in the nation's history?
Lobotomies, maybe.
Yeah.
BBL.
Hey. BBLs are not going to be protected, they are not deeply rooted in the nation's history.
They are deeply rooted in the nation's history.
I would argue that general, I would say that generally, gender affirming care and gender affirming clothing and presentation have been around since the inception of humanity. That's just the thing that we don't talk about or recognize, but what other things would you say are deeply rooted in history or in our nation's history? Do you think about day-to-day things like medical procedures being part of that? So Thomas also wants to overturn it and overturn certain things like married contraception. Catherine the Great was practicing it, wasn't she? But is that not deeply rooted in America's history? He also wants to overturn it was considered sodomy at the time, we now do not, sodomy is only when it is unconsensual, consensual sex between individuals of the same sex is what was addressed in Lawrence v. Texas. Do we think the first time, actually, anybody who's watched Queen Charlotte?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, was the first time that anybody engaged in consensual same-sex activities after the founding of America? Nah. Plenty of well-known bachelors in the monarchy line, all right? And they weren't well-known bachelors because they couldn't find the right lady.
They were buried with their best friend.
They just stayed with their best friend their whole lives, they're just best friends. We love to hide gay people in history. And to his point, he says same-sex marriage is not deeply rooted in our nation's history. Is marriage? Absolutely, the right to marry is one of the most fundamental, according to our Constitution and according to the most constitutional narratives. It is one of the most important rights that we hold as individuals, the right to marry freely. Why does he differentiate? What is the difference between same-sex marriage and marriage? Is there any other difference? Huh? Genders of the parties, yes.
I wanna do a great job on separation of church.
Fun question now, because we're here with Thomas. Is interracial marriage deeply rooted in the nation's history?
No.
In fact, what is the nation's history suggest about it?
It's opposite of deeply rooted.
It is the opposite of deeply rooted, which is why we had to have the case. Right?
But that's what I want to.
So why does Thomas say, okay, why does Thomas say that? Okay, why does Thomas say that? And we know that openly that's going to affect it, right? If you suggest that that's one we need to revisit, then he no longer has a right to stay married to, I don't know what her name is, we'll just call her January 6th. No right to stay married to her, right? Or it might mean his marriage just dissolves.
His right to vote, his right to be free, all of that is not deeply rooted either.
Is it? Ooh, now we're gonna push it.
Has he ever
Are
made a
those-
statement about that?
No, he does not. Well, Thomas doesn't make a statement unless he's writing for an opinion. He's only asked one question his entire time on the bench.
What is it?
I don't remember, but it wasn't Obergefell.
Oh, okay, I was like, whatever.
It was a completely asinine, stupid
Oh,
question, but it wasn't Obergefell. It was the first time on the bench that he talked.
Oh,
He's actually quite notorious for falling asleep during oral arguments.
real.
So if you listen to oral arguments from the time that he joined the court, whenever that was, to current times, you will hear all the justices like I do, like you will see on the final debate. If you watch the final debate, there are currently examples posted of what happened at last year's debate, so you can see I will be acting as the judge still again, which means I do intend to interrupt you and ask questions. It is my intention to do so. I'm not trying to throw you off, always. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm asking because I want you to elaborate more, because I think you're making a great point and you're not getting as far as I want you to with it, but that's what I'm gonna do, just like the judges do. Justices do on the Supreme Court, except us. What do you think about a justice who has never asked a single question in any case that was presented to him?
He's not having critical thoughts.
Why is he here?
What is he getting paid for?
I love all these, but
He did not show up today at this time.
he did not show up today.
Yeah, I thought I think we're saying that he missed this Monday, the court said, he never showed up.
He just didn't show up to court today, too.
Is he,
They're currently in session. The only time the Supreme Court is not in session is during the summer break. That's usually when the opinions are announced. Or the final opinion. So if I'm a teacher in a class, I assume if you don't ask questions, it's because one, you definitely understood all of the material and you have no questions, or it's because it is so far over your head and you have no idea what's going on.
that's what I'm saying about the critical thought.
That's what I'm saying. So my assumption is you don't have any critical thought in your head. It's very cocky and makes me know.
Usually they are on the line though, like you have to exude
That's kind of
arrogance, you probably don't have critical thought, kind of true.
Go ahead,
Robert,
Ben.
were you saying something?
Once they got drunk, doesn't mean they don't get like thoughts or not.
That makes the Supreme Court.
Something in his brain. different phrases
got
or not.
You don't have to be smart to be on.
You do not have to be smart to be on the Supreme Court. You have to be smart to be president of the United States.
Yeah, but you have to, like, when you're getting become a judge on the Supreme Court, you have to pass some kind of like stuff. Or is it just like-
No, you are just, you don't even have to be an attorney. You do not have to be an attorney to be a Supreme Court.
I think their code of ethics recently.
No, they did not.
I mean, it's very.
Name, all right. It'll begin with unified class, 18 different conversations happening, like in the general class. Ben, where do you wanna go?
So real quick, Roberts noted that he would not have overturned Roe, but he still voted with a concurrence, so he tried to save face a little bit. The dissent, I would recommend reading it if you want to.
Tell us a little bit about the dissent.
They kind of go off on a couple different
Because-
inconsistencies.
Are the dissents, Ben,
Well, we have them here, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Breyer.
which just so happen to all present as,
Liberal government.
well, they are. They're actually.
Stephen Breyer's like a woman.
Huh? Breyer's not, I was gonna say, Sotomayor, Kagan, and, Ketanji Brown Jackson, are all women of color. Kagan is Jewish.
They discussed a couple of inconsistencies, which I've written a decent
Tell us
amount
about
on. The main thing, which Kavanaugh, who.
Who sexually assaulted many people in
Yeah,
college. and made it to-
I texted my dad while working on that, said this guy's an idiot. He also had 80-something serious issues in his oath. Or his, what's it called when they're introduced? The introductory hearing, something like that. And attorneys looked at it, they said these are serious issues, but they don't have power at the Supreme Court, so they can't do anything about it. He's kind of an idiot, his opinion showed that.
It means that there were 80 times in which the persons who ran a criminal background check flagged and said, that's a problem, that's an inconsistency, that's a problem, that's an inconsistency. As an intern with the Marshal Service and the Office of Congressional Affairs, I had to pass a background check with zero importance or identified issues. But a member of the Supreme Court has 80 identified issues with his criminal background check, and including sexual assault allegations, which were put on trial during his congressional hearing.
They had a week to find evidence for it, I believe.
Yes.
And then certain evidence and witnesses were shot down, they were not allowed. It was all pretty shady if you look into it.
And what party controlled Congress at that time?
I think we know.
Yep. Keep going.
So, Kavanaugh is his own issue, but his concurrence that he wrote was that the court should be neutral. And that was my main question I wanted to pose, is if the court should be neutral.
What would neutrality look like here?
That's exactly.
Well, no, the court is supposed to be neutral. That is Supreme Court law. It is supposed to be a neutral
So-
arbiter of the law.
Neutral in his description is not taking a side on these social issues or other issues. Neutral in regard to. They can't be neutral. Well, that's my.
Why can't the court be neutral then?
Well. I think gun control is a social issue. And if you were to be neutral on it and leave it up to the state. There would be states who would outlaw guns.
There would absolutely be. And is that?
They are.
Deeply rooted in this, in history?
Would that not, would being neutral not let stuff like guns, drugs, other things. That could be considered in this realm,
Absolutely.
it would push them to the states, which would. Cause a whole lot of issues because they would not like that states were banning guns, and so.
If it had been up to the states, or we shouldn't opine on social issues, what would have happened with slavery?
We would still be divided by north and south, well, even more so than we are now.
Do you not think that would have been the result? What if the court didn't opine on a social issue, like whether or not Black men and women had the right to vote? Sorry. Here in the South, probably still wouldn't. Places in California, maybe. What if we held things, like, obviously, we're talking about abortion here, what about marriage?
Only people of this, only white
Do you remember that really famous woman that was a clerk in Kentucky, who looked like she came off a prairie somewhere? who, got arrested for refusing to issue gay marriage license after a burger bill was announced. She lost her job. Name what, something or other.
Yeah, I remember that.
The, like long hair, it was like always in a
Like she worked
braid.
for the government, but she refused to do it because of her religion.
Yeah, refused to do it for religion. So if it was left to the states, wouldn't every individual state make that call?
And if it's left to the states, then that's something I just said, and what's their point? If they're leaving everything to the states.
And that would be like if I got married in Tennessee, but I crossed state lines and go over to.
Boom,
Arkansas,
that's
now
where the
I'm not
Supreme
married.
Court comes in, and that's why we have to have the Supreme Court weigh on social issues, because we have what's called the Full Faith and Credit Act. Full Faith and Credit Act, which means if you do something in one state, and one state says, yes, you are married, yes, you have a driver's license, yes, here is your birth certificate, yes, here is your death certificate. Those documents and relationships must be recognized to the full faith and credit as they would have been in their original state.
Why isn't that the same for gun laws then?
It is.
But you have to know they, like, they're very specific in the classes that you have to look into gun, because like here we do not have, you don't have to have a permit, but.
Correct.
In some, so,
So if somebody comes here, they don't get a permit.
but if I am a person.
But if you go to Missouri,
You have to have, you
you
cannot
have to
have,
have a permit,
yeah, so why wouldn't my original state's law hold?
because you're now in a different jurisdiction.
But isn't that the same for the marriage argument too?
That's a state of being, one is a state of possession. Like a name change, they can't just deny your name change because they don't want to recognize it, it is now your name change. Or like a death certificate, they can't just be like, well, we're a different state, we didn't issue that death certificate, no, you need to recognize this person died. Therefore, this other person is entitled to the inheritance. That's why the full faith and credit exists, it specifically exists to monitor or to continue to regulate interpersonal relationships when they cross state lines. Because states can't regulate other states, that's what the Supreme Court does. So that is why the Supreme Court weighs in on social issues, which is another reason why Kavanaugh's opinion is very stupid.
Well, in regard to also being, or in, while also discussing how neutral the court should be, he mentioned that Roe v. Wade was egregiously wrong. He also mentioned that it has caused significant real world consequences, significant harm to protection of fetal life. Which to me
Does that seem like
doesn't
a-
sound neutral.
Does that sound neutral to you?
While the majority in general discuss the 14th Amendment and life and liberty and how they can't say everything is life and liberty, because then drugs or prostitution and stuff that they believe is wrong, much like they believe abortion is wrong, could be considered life and liberty. So that while framing abortion with prostitution and that they think that's wrong, that also shows that they're not neutral on this issue. So we've discussed that Roe and Casey aren't written too well, and I don't think this case is either. I think there's so many inconsistencies throughout it. The only problem is it's 2 years later and we still have all the same, well, not with the same justices, so it's going to be a bit. But
I don't think we've seen the end of abortion in
I
the
would
Supreme
think-
Court. I think that no one is gonna wanna bring it to the current court. We're gonna wait until some of these old geezers,
Die.
this one's dead, Briar's already gone. But the others were stuck with for a while, but the other two. But they have also openly said that they are hanging on to make sure that a Republican president can appoint their replacement.
2 other quick notes. They were comparing it to illegal actions at the time, which I said shows the side, but it also
What illegal
Doesn't-
actions do they compare to?
doesn't, well, I said the drug issue and prostitution, but it doesn't make sense because abortion is not a justice issue.
Mhm.
It wasn't at the time before this case. It was a family issue. It was a personal issue. So they're comparing a personal issue, to something that the justice system was taking on.
Can you distinguish the harm in theory? Again, I want you to suspend whatever your personal beliefs may be about drugs and prostitution. Can you differentiate the harm between abortion and drugs or prostitution?
Absolutely.
How?
Because one of them is active harm. The other one is, well, this person might not have been born. Or isn't gonna, like, it's. But does something like prostitution really have harm? Yeah, I mean, that's argument.
I was gonna say, well, that's what I'm saying. Tell me how you would distinguish those arguments. Because we in theory, why do we in theory prosecute prostitution and drugs versus why do we in theory prosecute abortion? Go ahead.
So I think with drugs and prostitution. Maybe the harm isn't to the drug dealer, but it is to the drug user. Because like we see today, people cut stuff with fentanyl, they don't weigh things the right way, they like try and like slash things so it's like less on production value. It contributes to addiction and it contributes to overdoses, which is why paramedics have Narcan, we have Good Samaritan laws, like that is a wholly recognized thing that causes.
All police officers in the city of Memphis now are also required to carry Narcan, so that they can administer it to anyone they suspect having an overdose.
Prostitution can be a choice, but it's not really like, oh yeah, I'm happy to be like, it's based around their circumstances, and everyone who's a prostitute is not always a willing prostitute, they could be a product of like sex trafficking. So like the prostitute it is the harm themselves, and like the people who they interact with, their job, or the people who are paying them, customer, are contributing to their harm as well. You could say children who are around in that situation absolutely are harmed, traumatized in some form or fashion. But with abortion, like Ben said, like it's a personal matter within the household, and you by the 15-week deadline, so not everything is developed with the fetus to say that they are experiencing pain. The mother's experiencing pain.
Can we do genetic counseling at this point, by the way?
Genetic.
No. So we wouldn't even know if there's a genetic issue that will eventually prohibit pregnancy if successful pregnancy. We can't even tell that yet, which we can tell if you are allowed later in the gestational period. To do early DNA testing, you can find out the father's identity, you can do DNA matching that way. You can also find out if there's any identifiable chromosomal issues that will prevent a healthy pregnancy or a healthy birth.
So yeah, it's like at that point, 15-week mark, like there's probably no harm to the fetus because they haven't developed the actual feeling of what's uncomfortable or what's comfortable. Like it's uncomfortable to the mother, and it's definitely not uncomfortable to the father or to the sperm donor or whoever is contributing to their half of the fetus.
And outside the people who are pregnant, does anyone typically know other than the parent or other than the doctor who performs? Is that true about drug use or prostitution?
No.
Doesn't that all take place outside your home? Or a lot of it takes place outside your home?
And another thing is like the government doesn't get theirs on prostitution and drugs, like they don't get their taxes, their
Oh,
break
true,
on
right.
that. Like we want you all to regulate abortion and like have charge our insurance, we want you to do it, like we want the government to make theirs on that, but like drugs are like a very high, I don't know how to say, like a lot of money is filtered through drugs and the government doesn't get theirs on that.
And specifically illegal drugs, because we know that they benefit buku from legal drugs, right?
Yeah.
And sell them that. Look at diabetes medication, just alone, diabetes, very 50%, let alone cancer. I'm not even gonna go down that rabbit hole, about 217. Anyway. So how would can you reverse distinguish those? Isn't it also true that people who advocate, for, the legalization of all drugs, not just specifically marijuana, and, that advocate for, decriminalizing sex work, that they make several arguments about consensuality and how some of those things don't really hurt other people. And yes, we recognize that in some situations people are forced. We're not targeting those situations by decriminalizing. That would obviously still be criminal. That's a coercive situation. But if someone wanted to consensually engage in sex work, like people do on OnlyFans, and make lots and lots of money at other people's discretion, shouldn't they be allowed to do so? It's their body, it's their choice. Damn. Same thing with drug use, right? You want to continue to ingest the substance. How do we feel if we started putting like a tax on sugar or a daily intake limit on that? You couldn't take any more of that because there is a lot of research that suggests, specifically us as Americans, take way too much sugar. It is slowly killing all of us. It is actually identified as a public health emergency. So Congress could, since it's been identified as a public health emergency, make a law and say, all right, no companies are allowed to make any products with more than your daily 10% of sugar. How do we think that's gonna go?
Yeah.
Is sugar production deeply and capitalism deeply rooted in the nation's history? So are we gonna be able to knock down that? Ben, any other last thoughts on dogs?
One humorous thing is they wrote a decent amount on how their decision was not discrimination based on sex, which I cannot find as an official opinion in argument in this case, in Casey or in Roe. So I don't know why they decided to discuss that besides saving face. And that I wrote that putting in justices for one opinion and one opinion only is a good way to have it in that court.
Any other last thoughts on dogs? What are you actually doing Wednesday? We want to discuss next.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes,
So
Andy.
those two cases that we had before, and again, it's Snyder and Jonathan,
Mhm.
are we?
I was like, you guys wanna do them?
Cause before you put Roe and Dobbs on there, it's not.
All right, let's discuss Snyder and Johnson next time. That'll be probably our last class. And then next week we will do, or the week after that, we do your debate. So in class, we'll discuss Snyder and Johnson. Is that it? So we'll discuss those on the 14th Amendment as well, and then that will be it. So, I'll see you guys on Wednesday virtually.
Will you post the two cases for the debating?
Oh, we already did. All right. I don't know why you're being sassy.